Hey guys, let's talk about tonight's episode of Scandal. Now, we're back after having a brief break from it last week. And oh my goodness, this episode was crazy. So, we start off with Olivia at her dad's house, the way it left off 2 weeks ago with her walking up to the front door and he's like, "Welcome home." And Jake comes into the room. Her hair is all disheveled and a hot mess. And he's like, he's like, "You might want to fix your hair." It was just funny because we all know what happens when you don't tend to your hair after a few days. And clearly, Olivia has let herself fall by the wayside a little. But we quickly find out that she's pretending. I'm sure that she is feeling some kind of way that she killed the ex vice president, but it's not really what we think. And so she's pretending so that she can get information out of Jake and her dad. And we quickly find out that she's secretly seeing Quinn and Huck and revealing information to them. Now, this episode was definitely a very good eye opener as to how Jake and Olivia's father first became like acquainted with one another. And of course, Rowan seeked out Jake because he, was getting into a lot of trouble. We first find out that his father was basically molesting his sister, and we see Jake as a young child, and that he overhears this fight that him and his father and his mother are having. And so you just get, obviously, that the father was a terrible person. He was in that moment yelling and beating up his wife, and Jake is, well, actually his name was Pete Harrison or Pete Harris. And so he's got a completely different name right now, because Rowan just basically reinvented him. And he tried to save him from spending 10 years in prison and basically being somebody else's bitch. And now you're going to be my bitch. And Rowan is so twisted in this episode. And of course, we have a lot of these Papa Pope rants that he's so famous for, to the point where you're like, okay, we get it. But he was relentless with Jake, and he beat him up, and then he was acting like he's all like, "You're my son and I love you and I'm never going to hurt you." I'm like, "How can you basically verbally assault this man and talk about how horrific his father was, which he was, that how could you as a 17-year-old kid basically let your father rape your sister over and over again and then be like, 'Oh, I'm never going to hurt you. I'm here to protect you.'" I'm like, what is happening? So sorry, I didn't mean to jump to the end, but this episode was just so fascinating to see the evolution of Jake and Rowan's relationship. It was so terrifying, and he basically assaulted Jake for most of their relationship and put him in the hole for a month and did all these terrible things. But yet, like Jake keeps saying in the present, how is it that I've tried so many times to get away from this man and he still pulls me back in? And it's this weird dynamic that Rowan has been able to do. He even did it with Olivia. He's done it with Huck. Like, he's just this, like, I don't know. He just instills all this fear, but yet this fatherly love. And it's just really creepy. And the fact that he calls Jake his son, and then he, like, him and Olivia, like, Olivia's his daughter, like, it's all just weird. Now, on the other side of this, we had, of course, Olivia faking that she was, sad that she didn't want to go back to the White House because it was a scene where she killed the vice president in the last episode. And so she's really playing this up for Jake. And then, of course, he catches on and he's like, "Oh, I almost fell for it." And she pretends like she's drunk and she's like getting him to open up. And she's like, "You don't want to marry this woman. You don't even love her. Admit it. You don't love her." He's like, "I don't love her." And it's like, of course we know that he doesn't love her. And it's again this whole triangle thing with Olivia and Jake and Olivia and Fitz. And so sorry, I know I'm jumping everywhere, but before we get to that scene, I actually really enjoyed the scene between Fitz and Jake on at the residence at the White House. And it's like these two grown men having this adult conversation finally about Olivia. And it was just nice to see them not be bickering at each other, and yet not like being honest with each other, but not really being honest with each other. So when Fitz is like, "Oh, I'm surprised that you're getting married because, I figured once I was out of the picture, you and Olivia would be together." And he's like, "Yeah, I guess bad timing always, like, it's just never going to happen." And then Fitz is like, "Are you in love with her?" And he's like, "Who?" It's like Elizabeth or whatever the girl's name is. And he's like, oh yeah, sure, of course. But really, he's in love with Olivia. And then, Jake in turn return says, but you're dating, right? Like, are you over Olivia? And he's just basically like, yeah, I'm just dating. Like, I'm trying to be normal. So they're both basically not saying what is really the truth, which is that they're still both not over Olivia, and she's just somebody who's gonna obviously have this effect on them. So the other part that was so like that moment of like it was so weird because it was like it felt like the first time Jake and Olivia have been really real to each other obviously was when he finds out she's lying about pretending to be drunk just so that she can find out what's really going on, and we find out that Rowan wants Jake to marry this woman. I can't remember her name, sorry. So that he can elevate his status so that he can become the vice president. Oh my God. So of course Olivia's like, you can't do that. You can't marry him. You got to get away from my dad. And he's like, how exactly? How am I supposed to do this? Right. And then, so she goes upstairs, she's all upset. And he's like, basically we do all these horrible things to each other, but you are the one that I love. Like, you are the one. It doesn't matter how many times we've hurt each other over and over again. You are the person that I'm in love with. And then of course Olivia walks away. She goes up into the bed. She's having these moments. She comes out into the hallway. Jake is standing there in the hallway. And can I just say, Jake looked very good in this episode. I mean, in every scene, he just looked really good. And then when he was like at the end, oh my goodness, he did. I don't know what it was. In this episode, he just looked really, really good. So he's standing in the hallway, his shirt's unbuttoned, and then these two have this moment, they're looking at each other, and then they walk towards each other, and they kiss, and it was like, if I'm being honest, it was like the realest kiss that these two, I feel, have had, like, ever. Because, when Jake and Olivia first got together, it was lies. Like, he was lying, she didn't know him, what was going on. And then when, their whole relationship was sort of playing out, it was like she was always still really in love with Fitz, so that just never really felt real to me. Like, even though I kind of liked Jake at the time, it just never felt like it was really going to be a real relationship because we knew that her heart was still with Fitz. But at this moment, when her and Fitz are done, and it feels like they're done, it does kind of feel like that, and they're in a place where it seems like, okay, they could still be friends, whatever. That moment between Jake and Olivia felt real, and then they kissed, and I was like, damn. I was like, now I'm all confused again because this whole stuff that's been going on with Jake all season has just been creeping me out. Him in her bedroom, them two like doing it in the bathroom, him like in her bed, like it's been all kinds of inappropriate. But that kiss in the hallway, if I'm being honest, it was hot and it felt real. And then there's that moment she pushes him away, and then he like looks at her and he's just like, don't. And you can just see that she actually just gives in and kisses him. And it's like a real honest kiss, and it felt real. And so when she basically just destroys him at the end of the episode, damn. I mean, damn. So, of course, Rowan, so, Jake is basically like, okay, I'm not going to marry this girl. And Olivia's like, break her heart at the altar because this will tarnish your image in the media. And then there's no way that you can ever become VP. And then her dad's just going to have to get over that, right? So that's the plan. And Jake's all on board. And Olivia's like, yeah, cool. And she's got this smile on her face. Like, she's happy about it. Like, it feels like she's actually wants this plan to happen. So she gets to the wedding. And of course, Papa Pope, who knows everything, like he's like Whisper 2000, who knows? He can hear every conversation. Knows exactly what's about to happen. So he whispers to Olivia, you just make sure you convince him that the wedding's back on, because if he doesn't marry her, I'm going to slit Jake's throat. And then if he finds out that I told you that he has to marry her, I'm going to slit Jake's throat. And she's like, and he's gripping her hand like tight. And he's like, because he's basically like, he's the only hope left in this family, and I would rather him be dead than him be useless and just be average and ordinary. Like, basically you, Olivia. And I'm just like, this man is can somebody just put a bullet in Rowan's head, because he is the worst man ever. So of course, what does Olivia do? She traipses around the corner and she just eviscerates. Like, I mean, eviscerates Jake. Like, to the point where it was just like, I was like, oh my God, stop. Like, it was so mean. And just knowing, like, seeing this, because we've never gotten a backstory about Jake, really. So getting this backstory of what kind of like a wounded bird he's been like his whole life, right? So he's this child who grew up in this horrible family, and then to know that he had all these rage issues, and he was arrested so many times and had all these just like strikes against him on his record and everything, and then he's basically taken into the care of Rowan, who's the worst, and he has to grow up with this man now, and then he's stuck in a hole for a month, like he's just beaten to a pulp by Charlie, like just terrible, terrible, terrible. So like some of the things that he's gone through to get to the stage where he worked at B613, and he's gonna go through all this stuff, and then you find out that he shoots his father, like that scene when Rowan's all like, so, are you going to be with me, or are you going to just be an average, ordinary person? And he's like, thank you for everything, and thank you for all of it. And he walks out, and you see like the devastation on Rowan's face, and then you see him, he's still dressed in his like sailor's uniform, and he goes to his family home, and you hear the father like, what are you doing here? And then you just hear 2 gunshots go off, and he kills his father. I mean, I did not know this about Jake, and it's breaking my heart a little bit because it explains a lot. And that scene the next day after they made love, because let's face it, like it's the first time I think that they've actually made love, when they're in the kitchen and they're kind of smiling with each other, and then she's all like, I don't like, he's like, how do we be normal, like how do we move forward from this? And she's just like, I don't know. He's like, let's just sit here and let's just have breakfast together, and let's just pretend like last night didn't end. And it was just a really nice moment, I guess, the calm before the major storm, which was Olivia just being horrible in that breakup, like horrible. She's all like, you're pathetic. I can't believe that you would think that I'd actually want you. I really love Fitz, and blah, blah, blah. Like she was just digging that knife into him so deep, and his face was just like crushed. And he played that perfectly. And then he gets up at the altar and he looks over and he sees Rowan's smug face, and he just knows. He knows his hand is all over this. And you're thinking, oh my God, he's not going to do it. He's not going to do it. And then Rowan's just going to kill him anyway, even after like Olivia just destroyed him. But he doesn't. He says yes. And of course, Rowan's all happy and he's giddy about it. And once again, Jake is back in Rowan's clutches. And it's so terrible. Like, it's such a heartbreaking scene. And then the song, of course, that's playing is First Time Ever I Saw Your Face, which is just beautiful. And then it's just such a terrible scene with the song playing. Wow. I really like this episode because there was a lot going on. It wasn't very predictable. Rowan, of course, was over the top, and he always is. But it was fascinating. And I'm still a little bit confused as to Olivia's journey in this episode because, the back and forth that's been going on between her and Jake, she's desperate to find out what's been going on between her, Jake and her father. And they've had some really weird, awkward scenes, like where they've been super aggressive and super like just creepy. And then in this episode, she's all but admitting that she loves him and that she wants to be with him. And I'm like, I don't know if I kind of believe it, but I'm like, do I? I don't know, because she's all over the place with her emotions. Like, because even last week in that episode with her, and then her hugging Fitz at the end, I don't even know. I don't even know what to say. But it was a strong episode nonetheless. And Jake it was a really strong performance by Scott Foley in this episode. And I thought it was his best work to date. Yeah, let me know what you thought of this week's episode. Sorry, I know I was a bit all over the place, and I jump all over the place when I get excited, but I think I covered pretty much everything. Some really, really, really strong scenes in this episode, for sure. And I mean, Olivia being drunk, fake drunk, awesome. Like, all that stuff was so good. I mean, Kerry Washington, she just kills it every time. And like I said, the scene with Fitz and Jake at the Oval was a really nice scene, and just sort of seeing these 2 grown men shed their feelings about the same woman and be really kind of honest, even though they weren't being honest about it in that moment, was kind of cool. And again, Rowan is just like, how are we gonna get rid of this man? I mean, I don't know, but he is just too much, and nobody can get like one up on him ever. So yeah. All right, guys, that's it for me. Let me know what you thought of this week's episode. Leave a comment, like, and subscribe, and I will see you next week.